A worker climbs near the top of an aluminum A-frame stepladder to complete a task high on the wall. As she extends her reach, her weight shifts beyond the ladder's stable range. Never stand on the top rungs of an A-frame stepladder or lean your upper body outside the vertical side rails. On a bridge construction site, a crawler crane begins a heavy hoist. As the load exceeds the machine's rated capacity, the center of gravity shifts, reducing overall stability. Never attempt a hoist without verifying that the load weight and boom radius remain strictly within the crane's load capacity chart. Every crane has a defined stability threshold. When suspended weight exceeds the counterbalancing leverage of the rear counterweights, controlled balance is reduced, and instability can develop quickly. Lift directors must calculate load weight, rigging weight, and boom angle before any tension is applied. On this active factory floor, a worker guides a large pane of glass suspended from a suction lift using one hand. When he steps back and releases his grip, the top-heavy panel shifts beyond its balance point. Never rely on a single-handed grip to stabilize a large suspended load during movement or staging. Large glass panels behave like broad, fragile surfaces that can shift unexpectedly. If physical guidance is removed too early, balance control can be lost quickly. Material handlers must use mechanical A-frame supports or secure tag lines when staging oversized glass. Workers should maintain full attention and active control while loads remain suspended. Once center of gravity alignment shifts outside the support base, materials can move downward without warning. In a staging yard, a worker guides a concrete pump hose. The boom moves too close to overhead power lines, creating an electrical hazard for nearby workers. Never operate a concrete pump boom or high-reaching machinery within the minimum approach distance of active power lines. Metal frameworks and wet concrete create conductive pathways. Even without direct contact, high-voltage electrical energy can bridge air gaps if clearance is insufficient. Site managers must conduct overhead hazard assessments before deploying aerial equipment and establish clearly marked exclusion zones. On an industrial street, a forklift descends narrow metal ramps from a flatbed tow truck. An unexpected instability develops. Never load or unload a forklift using trailer ramps without a trained ground spotter and verified ramp alignment. Forklifts have concentrated rear counterweights and elevated centers of gravity. If one tire loses structural support, overall balance is immediately compromised. Ramps must be spaced and secured to match the forklift wheelbase precisely. Operators should descend slowly while following spotter guidance. Seatbelts must always be worn to keep the operator position within the protective overhead guard structure during unexpected movement situations and sudden machine shifts. In a loading yard, a worker steps away from a flatbed truck as a large steel coil is hoisted overhead. At that moment, a brief equipment malfunction affects the suspended load. Never stand beneath or beside a suspended load during active lifting operations. Overhead lifting systems can experience unexpected equipment performance variations or rigging displacement without prior indication. Establish physical exclusion zones during hoisting and ensure all personnel are clear before loads leave the truck bed. Maintain visual awareness of suspended materials until fully secured. On a loading dock, a worker stands on a large wooden crate resting on elevated forklift forks. As the forklift shifts slightly, the unsecured load crate begins sliding off. Never stand on an elevated forklift cargo as a work platform. Forklift forks are engineered to lift stabilized pallets, not to secure loose cargo supporting dynamic body weight. Workers may only be elevated using an approved safety cage securely attached to the forklift mast. In a distribution yard, a worker unloads tall pressurized gas cylinders using a hydraulic liftgate. An unsecured cylinder tips, damaging the valve assembly. Never transport or maneuver pressurized cylinders without securing them using approved straps or chains. The valve assembly is the most vulnerable component. If compromised, rapid internal pressure discharge can generate a force sufficient to cause sudden reactive movement. On a residential street, a crew unloads a forklift using a narrow ramp. As the operator applies the throttle, the acceleration response is stronger than anticipated. Never descend a steep transport ramp without first testing throttle responsiveness and confirming precise ramp alignment. Industrial equipment can respond abruptly depending on gear ratio and torques settings. Use mechanical winches to regulate descent speed when unloading unfamiliar equipment. Operators must remain seatbelted inside the protective frame. Ground workers should stand clear of the active unloading zone to prevent exposure to shifting equipment. Inside a wood processing facility, a worker moves through a narrow clearance as the panel shifts laterally, creating a pinch point hazard. Never enter the travel path of materials being fed into automated machinery. Moving panels driven by powered rollers can shift position without warning. Facilities must establish marked exclusion zones around active feed tables. Workers should always use designated walkways when crossing production lines. Taking shortcuts near energized machinery increases exposure to mechanical movement hazards, especially when the machine is actively applying forward pressure that can redirect materials unexpectedly. On a construction site, a mobile crane performs a blind hoist over a wall. The suspended load exceeds safe capacity, shifting the crane's center of gravity beyond its outrigger support base. Never conduct a hoist without verifying load weight and boom radius remain within approved capacity limits. Every crane has a defined stability threshold determined by leverage geometry and counterweight balance. Lift directors must confirm all variables before lifting begins. Operators must immediately stop operations if overload indicators activate. Stability depends entirely on accurate load calculations and adherence to manufacturer guidelines, because even a small capacity exceedance can shift leverage geometry enough to reduce safe support margins rapidly. Inside a steel mill, workers step onto the internal rails of a cooling bed, which are not designed for walking. Never use machine rails or internal structures as walkways, even when equipment is not operating. These surfaces are designed for material movement, not foot traffic, and often contain gaps or uneven spacing. Always use designated catwalks with guardrails and approved access points. For inspections within machine areas, use appropriate fall protection systems anchored to secure locations, because inactive equipment can still present physical hazards. High on a ladder with a cutting torch, a worker slices through a steel beam, not realizing that once the beam releases, the movement beneath him will change instantly. Never use a ladder for cutting or removing heavy structural supports. A beam holds its weight until the very last moment. When it finally separates, the sudden movement can shift the ladder or pull it off balance, leaving the person with no stable footing. Demolition cutting must be done from a secure working platform, such as scaffolding. The movement of a freed structural beam cannot be predicted precisely, and when it drops, it happens far too quickly to react safely from a ladder.